A new report shows that 8 million Americans have fallen into poverty since May as stimulus has dried up, with 6 of those 8 million people falling into poverty in the last 3 months. This is a direct result of a failure in leadership. Mitch McConnell sat on the stimulus that was passed by the House in May and just refused to negotiate on it. And now Pelosi is kind of playing politics when Trump wants to pass a second stimulus and could potentially lead Republicans to do so. But back to Trump, because he made a speech talking about how many jobs he had created. And this report just came out today. 8 million falling into poverty.
At the end of the last administration, the Congressional Budget Office projected fewer than 2 million jobs would be created in 3 years. Well, we did a little bit better than that. We created 7 million, and actually it'll be close to 8 million jobs by the time the final numbers came in. We lifted 6.6 million people out of poverty, achieving the largest poverty reduction in modern U.S. history.
So he's just not counting 2020? Those people still count, Donald. Those people still count. Those people who can't feed their kids, who are starving, who are unemployed, who've had no relief from the government, with all your leadership just constituting tweeting out random things all the time, as opposed to, he hasn't spoken to Pelosi in a year. Perhaps he could be hands-on with these negotiations, if he really cared about getting relief for Americans, instead of a PR stunt and a marketing speech where he talks about how he's improving the economy, when you're just gaslighting us. I've never seen such a disconnect. At least in past Republican administrations, they would acknowledge some of the reality and then give a propaganda campaign. They would take a kernel of truth and then expand upon it. Trump's just denying the entire reality. And it's insulting to those millions of people who are struggling right now. Here are the staggering figures that came out today. After an ambitious expansion of the safety net in the spring saved millions of people from poverty, the aid is now largely exhausted and poverty has returned to levels higher than before the coronavirus crisis, 2 new studies have found. The number of poor people has grown by 8 million since May, according to researchers at Columbia University, after falling by 4 million at the pandemic start as a result of a $2 trillion emergency package known as the CARES Act. Using a different definition of poverty, researchers from the University of Chicago and Notre Dame found that poverty has grown by 6 million people in the past 3 months, with circumstances worsening most for Black people and children. The recent rise in poverty has occurred despite an improving job market, an indication that the economy has been rebounding too slowly to offset the lost benefits. The Democratic House has twice passed multi-trillion-dollar packages to provide more help and to stimulate the economy, but members of a divided Republican Senate, questioning the cost and necessity, have proposed smaller plans. At its peak in May, the CARES Act's unemployment insurance kept more than 18 million people from poverty, the Columbia researchers found, but by September that number had fallen to about 4 million. The aid expansion did not reach everyone. About a third of the unemployed still do not receive unemployment checks. Undocumented workers are disqualified from unemployment aid, and no one in their households can get stimulus checks, including spouses and millions of American children. That's just heartbreaking. Imagine being undocumented in this situation. I mean, the pain those families are going through is unimaginable right now. And it just, as you can tell, it just makes me extremely angry. The fact that we are the wealthiest country in the world and yet also incredibly poor. I mean, there's been a meme going around on the internet saying that the United States is a third world country with a Gucci belt on. And that's kind of what it is, seeing how we treat people in this country. And how we don't have no problem thrusting them into poverty when everybody knows that these circumstances of this pandemic are out of their control. No more bootstraps theory for people in this scenario. No one's buying that. No one's buying that. Everybody knows that this is not because they didn't work hard enough. It's not a personal responsibility thing. We are in an economic depression as a result of the terrible reaction by this administration to the pandemic. When European countries, different areas, we could have responded very differently, done wage replacement, could have done massive stimulus, multiple UBI checks, all of these things that other countries have done. But of course, not in America. Not in America. This has ripped the mask off. You can't just go back to bootstraps theory anymore. It's not going to work. Donald Trump impulsively tweeting about stimulus packages saying he wants to go bigger. I mean, he's talking into the void right now. Mnuchin is his representative in these negotiations. He has no idea what's on the ground. Trump and Pelosi haven't spoken in a year. And Senate Republicans, they see the writing on the wall, and they don't really respond to Trump just tweeting out bigger stimulus. They're going to do what they feel their constituents want for them, especially if they're up for re-election. But I do think, even if you're a Republican partisan and you're in Tennessee and you have a representative who, is a Republican or whatever, you still want the stimulus. So if Pelosi was to come to an agreement with Mnuchin, I do think enough Senate Republicans would follow suit. But that's not what's happening right now. That's not what's happening right now. As 8 million Americans have fallen into poverty as a result of not passing a second stimulus, you can't put that on Democrats. You can't put that on Democrats because they tried twice from May to now. But now you can put it on Pelosi. Deal now. A deal now. The pain is too acute, and it will be too long lasting without a second stimulus. Come to an agreement now. Because in the lame duck, it's not going to happen. And then the earliest is February. And that's way too late for these millions of Americans.